Hi, I'm Alice, founder of the Aureus Group, and today we are back to discuss a very interesting topic, probably not the most glamorous, but it's to do with how to think like a CEO. So I think many people want the title of CEO. You look at all the high achieving C-suite leaders, either directors or executive level, and we all want to get there. We all want to get there, especially as young graduates. That's the goal, right? Most people are like, if you ask them what's your goal, they're like, I want to go to the top. So I remember in my young days when I was asked the same question, where do you see yourself getting into within this big corporate in the future? And I enthusiastically, with all the naivety of a young African, the future is Africa, they say, and they said, I want to be the first female technical director in this company. Keyword, first black female, and not just local. I was talking about the global setup. And at that time it looked so achievable, because it is actually. I think very many black females have proven us right over time across various industries, and also we've had people rising the ranks as well against all odds. And I think that's when I started really, the moment those words came out of my mouth, saying I want to be the first black female director globally for this business, the moment I started thinking about what would that really mean. And I also thought about, I don't think I need to start finding out what that means when I get there. I only will get there if I start considering what it takes to be a director or a CEO now. And I remember I was in a cohort of other young leaders, some from Uganda, some from South Sudan, North Sudan, and we began getting into leadership conversations, not within ourselves, but also with some of our CEOs at the time as well. And I remember our first lunch was with the CEO of the time. He was from Nigeria, lovely guy, heavy spender, life of the party, but he was very passionate about young leaders. And I remember sitting in the same table as him, and we were all so frightened, so flattered, even having lunch with him, literally, it was a big deal. But a couple of things that he said, and he spoke about leadership being influence. At the time, everything looked new. We didn't know what everything meant, but there are words that have stuck with us over a long period of time. And one of the things he spoke about, leadership being influence. It's not about how much you brought to the organization in terms of revenue. Did that make you a leader? That makes you an expert manager. You manage the system so well that the results were delivered. But for a great leader to be called a great leader, there's an element of influence that had to come into play, right? Influencing decisions, influencing systems, influencing people, and not just for now, but for the future, for posterity. And I think at the Aureus Group, we talk about building legacy in businesses, not just for today, but for the future. So I think the foundation for leadership for me was really anchored on how to influence as well, and how to get outcomes by influencing, but also by being influenced as well by the system and by the people within the organization. And so if you think about how to think about the CEO as a topic, maybe I'll break it down into 3 different segments. And I think the first one will be around CEOs think in systems, not in tasks. I think it's very obvious already, because as a CEO, remember, you are leading a strategy for a business, or you should be leading a strategy for a business. And as you do that, you're setting up systems that will outlast you, systems that will enable every other system, actually, and every other strategy within the organization to flourish, right? That are watertight, that are governed by the right board of directors to enable the outcomes to be achieved, not just once, but repeatedly. Because you want a company to stand the test of time. We've seen organizations lasting to 50 years. Some of the partner companies that were part of the company I worked for had brands, legacy brands, that had been there for 250 years plus. So you ask yourself, how 250 years and still standing so strong and still being entrenched in society? And you think about systems that work. So the first task of a CEO, or the first place mindset to have, if you want to start thinking like a CEO, is start thinking around what kind of systems are required in a business to deliver longevity for that organization. If you find yourself drowning in execution in your day-to-day, whether you are junior level, emerging level, or executive level, if you're constantly chasing tasks and chasing executional elements, then you've definitely dropped the ball on your path to thinking like a CEO. Because this is one of the topics I spoke about, carving out time and space to think critically. This is something most CEOs do, and they are ruthless around this, religiously carving time to think. And this enables them to decompress and get in fresh ideas, get in fresh networks to steer the company to the next level. So if you keep on getting yourself stuck in this loop of execution, because I know one of the traps in corporate is chasing the day-to-day. Even at senior level, it happens, I've seen it. And the moment a company starts thriving in that way of working, then there's a problem, there's a risk to the long term. That means you cannot see tomorrow. And tomorrow, if a risk occurs through this corner, you can't intercept it on time because you're too focused on the execution. So I think systems are there for a reason, to enable execution to run seamlessly, as we also focus on the future through our strategic thinking as well. I spoke about in a different podcast around mental clarity and its link to EQ as well. And you find that a CEO will always ask the question, what does the organization need? It's not about what do I think we should do now? What do I feel like we should do? That's not the question that top CEOs ask. So if you at the level can start always remembering the purpose as to why we are custodians at that given point in time in our leadership positions, we are just custodians. And at any given time, we should be asking the question, what does the company need? The more we ask that question, the more we remove ourselves, right, from subjectivity, from emotional decisions, from unnecessary conflicts, from broken partnerships, because you are now working towards one thing, what the company needs. That is what everybody is working towards, nothing else. All else becomes, like I said before, noise and chatter, or a means to an end. And I think CEOs are very good at this. At any given time, and if they step into a board meeting, they're discussing the company's interest at the bare minimum. Not what does the CEO feel and think about. It's about, is the company getting what it needs through your leadership? Are we on the right track with our vision, 2030 or whatever, 2050? Are we on track? What are the risks? Are we seeing the risks? Are we mitigating those risks to get us there as a company? So it goes without saying that as a CEO, the mindset is around thinking about the company first. And I talk about the company, it's about its strategy, the people that deliver the strategy, the systems put in place to deliver the goal, and of course, the partners we bring in together to deliver the objective for the organization, right? So that's the second thing that can help you to drive that CEO mindset, right? Putting the organization's needs first, because without the organization, then there's no system, there's no people. The third piece, and I think the final piece, and a very big one, which is also linked to one of the things we teach at Aureus, is around governance and posterity. The CEO's mindset is always around not just the short term, but there's a mid to long term. If you cannot cast a minimum 10-year vision for your company or for what you're doing for yourself or for the business, then you are far off from thinking like a CEO. Like, you need to think long term, because long term thinking enables you to plan longer, plan better, plan efficiently, get more clarity, onboard the right partners, set up the right systems for the long term. Not just this quarter's bonuses or results or revenue, but you're harvesting future earnings now by setting up the right systems in place. So a CEO is always on the lookout on, how do I make strategy better? How do I bring in the best partners, the best critical thinkers to the table, even as we execute on a day-to-day, because short-term results will enable us to invest for tomorrow, right? But the tomorrow will not be there if there is no long-term thinking around it. So one of the ways, and I always talk about this to the young managers I've worked with over time, is your job, yes, is to execute. Like I said before, somebody has to do the execution. It's the ladder. Execute. As you execute better, you learn leadership and you step into managing people. But even as you execute, you need to be intentional about where you are headed. So always taking time out to revisit strategies, to be interested in what the company has set out to do. Don't just execute for the sake of executing. Be interested in what the company vision is. Be part of setting that vision. Be very invested in understanding the changes happening at the top senior level and why. Be very curious around the industry shifts. One of the marketing directors, I remember at my one of my roles as a brand manager, he was very obsessed with giving this advice. He said, you guys need to be industry obsessed. Be obsessed with the industry. Know what's happening around you. Know the shifts happening around competition, around regulatory, around governance, around the government itself. That might impact how we drive our economy and our ecosystem within the business. And that's something I took to heart. So even as an emerging leader, you need to be vested in some of these things. And you find that then you're able to really hold a much more steadier learning curve for leadership and not wait until you get a leadership position to start unraveling strategy. It's too late. By the time you're trying to get there, somebody beat you to it. Somebody who's been investing in strategic conversations, in understanding the organization in and out, in partnering with strategic partners as well, and also in having a wider view of where the company needs to head. That can be done at any time. But as long as you have the intention to do it, you carve out time and you seek the leaders who are good at it already to help you to steer your thinking towards that direction. And every time you're delivering an executional task through the year or the quarter, always be curious. Why are we doing this? I think Simon Sinek, the author, speaks about it in his book. Always start with why, because that is the why that is going to answer strategic questions. So each time, whatever task it is, always think back to why is this important? And the more you understand the why, the more you find better ways to deliver on that task, and the more you find visibility that is above standard from your peers who are rushing to do the tasks, because you're now more intentional about what you need to deliver. You're now driven by a more bigger purpose, which is most likely aligned to the company's purpose and vision, right? So that's the third way to think like a CEO. So as you come to the end or towards the end of this podcast, I want you to think about what thinking like a CEO really is. And at the Aureus Group, we don't just teach the philosophy of a CEO being just somebody at the helm of an organization. Being CEO is about responsibility. It's about stewardship. It's about care, nurturing. It's about legacies that outlive you. And so even on the role that you're doing, if it's junior management, mid-level, are you already demonstrating that mindset? That whatever I am doing now, I'm setting up a system so that the next junior manager that comes after me will find a better system that is much more progressive because I stepped onto this role. If you think like that day by day, you'll find that you move differently, you operate differently, and the value you create for the organization becomes unmeasurable and becomes such a valued asset within the industry as well. And you also learn and grow. You cannot not grow if you're growing how you work, if you're growing how you think, if you're growing the systems that you're working around. There's no way you can fail to grow and become a bigger leader. So again, being CEO is not about being loud or being at the top. It's a huge responsibility. And I think the more you see it as such, the more joyous the journey becomes to the top. So to my future CEOs, thanks for staying tuned to today's episode. Follow our journey at the Aureus Group. Feel free to subscribe, like, share to your community and friends, and let's keep having more CEO level conversations. I think they're quite enjoyable. Yeah, thank you.